Hello, I'm Jeff Wade. I'm the lead pastor here at First Assembly of God in Ocala, Florida. And I am so glad that you are with me here to walk through the Old Testament. So far, we've been talking a lot about Old Testament history, and we'd kind of got to the end of 2 Samuel, where we were looking at King David and his reign and how God used him and the things that he did. And we saw that at the end of 2 Samuel, he passes away. And we move on to his son, who was born to him in Bathsheba, who's known as King Solomon. And last week, we ended up taking kind of a little break from talking about the history to flipping over to talk about the poetry books of the Old Testament. The reason we did that, Job, one of the poetry books, was written by someone else, but David had written much of Psalms. And then Solomon was responsible for much of the other poetry books, which were Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and the Song of Solomon. And so today we're going to get back to Solomon, and we're primarily looking at two books at kind of the beginning or the start of the two books. One is 1 Kings, and the other one is 1 Chronicles, that details these things. And if you've read 1 Kings and 1 Chronicles, you'll notice that many of the stories will overlap. And what they're going to have in common is they're covering the same period of Jewish history, but they're going to be a little different in their focus. First Kings is going to talk about how they end up in trouble and they end up being exiled and the nation's going to fall apart and punishment's going to come, and it's going to talk about why that's justified. Where Chronicles is going to be more of the story about how they theologically had stepped away from the truth of where they were supposed to be in God and how God was going to set things up for the restoration of the nation. And so they're very interesting, and a lot of times if you read a story in 1 Kings or 2 Kings and you want more detail on the character, you can go to 1 or 2 Chronicles and it'll fill in some more information. And so sometimes it's kind of good to compare those two and go back. But we're going now to talk about Solomon. And what we discover is, I think most of us are probably aware of God asked Solomon to ask him for whatever he wanted. And Solomon's choice was that he could have wisdom to rule the people. And God was honored that he asked that and pleased. And he said, Solomon, because you didn't ask for wealth or long life or any of those things, I'm going to give those things to you anyway. And I'm also going to give you wisdom to rule the people. And so Solomon's reign is kind of a golden era for Israel. We see that there are incredible blessings during this time. They don't really expand their territory, but what happens during Solomon's reign is that he begins to build up many of the cities. He fortifies them, he makes them stronger so they can withstand invaders. He also builds Israel's military a great deal, and so militarily they're going to be very strong. They can defend themselves. They're ready for anybody that's going to be coming in to give them problems. We also see that this is a time of great wealth. We see that Solomon expands foreign trade, and so there's all sorts of things that are flowing into Israel. A lot of money, a lot of wealth is coming in to the nation. We see that Solomon makes a lot of treaties with many of the nations around. And one of the ways you would seal a treaty in those days was if you made a treaty with a king, you would often marry his daughter. And so the king would give you the daughter, and you would marry her if you were a king of another country, and that would mean that your two families had been joined. Well, Solomon does this a lot, and he accumulates a lot of wives during this time. And so we see he also builds quite a bit. Solomon was probably more than anybody in history an incredible builder. He builds a beautiful temple to God in Jerusalem. He builds an incredible palace. And there's many other things that Solomon was building during this time and during his reign. And so Solomon would be the king of Israel that we would look at as the absolute best if it wasn't for the fact that Solomon ends up doing some dumb things during his lifetime. And there are things that are going to ultimately cause some huge problems in the nation of Israel. Terrible big problems, as a matter of fact. One of the things that's going to happen is, to build things, you're going to need a lot of money. And how do governments raise money? What do they do? Think about that. What does a government do to raise money? Taxes. And so Solomon begins to tax the people of Israel. He begins to use the younger people of Israel to kind of come. They have to serve terms that they've got to work and they've got to build. And so this isn't a program that's going to be very popular. And then Solomon does something else. He starts out young. He has this heart for God. God blesses him. All these incredible things happen. But he starts to marry all of these foreign women as he makes these treaties. And the number gets into the hundreds. And so for each of them, he builds them a temple and to their foreign gods there in the land of Israel, something that shouldn't have been done. And so he begins to bring idolatry into the nation. And so this makes some crazy big problems. And it gets a little worse as Solomon lives longer. And ultimately, one day, Solomon is going to pass away. He's going to die. And when he does, the roots of everything that he has done is really going to become apparent. He's made some incredible, difficult problems for the next generation. And we see that it happens with his son Rehoboam. There's two Boams in the story. One's Jeroboam and one's Rehoboam. And Rehoboam is the son of Solomon. And the way I've always remembered that is R and S come together in the alphabet. And so that's easy for me to remember R and S, Solomon and his son Rehoboam, or Rehoboam and Solomon, his dad. And then Jeroboam separate from them. And so he's the other guy with the last name, or first name of Boam. And so anyway, Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, becomes the king. And so here he's sitting. He's a young man. And he's kind of got all this power, all this wealth, this incredible nation. He gets to lead all of it. But there's problems. And these are problems that really were not anything new. There had always been kind of this internal tension that had existed between the northern part of Israel and the southern part. And if you remember when we talked about David, after Saul had passed away, there was a time of tension and kind of civil war between the northern part and the southern part. We see that this goes all the way back to the sons of Jacob, that the 12 tribes came from. There were tensions that existed there. And so there always was a little bit of some problems happening. We see in Judges that some of these tribes are kind of fighting amongst each other. And so the difficulties kind of multiply. There's all sorts of problems that happen. But then Solomon kind of united them together. They're going to stand together, it appears. But it ends up that Rehoboam is going to meet with his people, and the people get Jeroboam, who was somebody that Solomon had been against. Solomon had actually tried to kill him. He'd gone to Egypt to protect himself from Solomon. He kind of hid out there. And so once Solomon died, word comes to Jeroboam, hey, come back, Solomon's dead, and we want you to talk to his son for us. What do they want? What do they want Jeroboam to say to the son? Well, they want him to go as a representative, the people of Israel. They want him to go as a representative and to stand before Rehoboam and say this: we will serve you. We will be glad to do whatever you ask, but we want you to cut taxes, and we want you to stop all this building where we're having to go and slave and labor after all these things. And so if you will do this, we will gladly serve you. And so Rehoboam doesn't answer quickly. Instead, he says, well, give me 3 days to think about this, and we will come back, and we will be able to we'll be able to discuss this. We'll look at this, and I'll tell you what I've got to say. And so, okay, that's good with everybody. And so Rehoboam kind of retires back, and he talks to Solomon's advisors, these older men, and he says, what should I do? And the older men say, what they've asked is not unreasonable. It's been heavy taxes. It's been hard labor for them. They have every right to ask this. Why don't you cut back, and they will serve you all the days of their life. You'll be a king that they're going to love. And Rehoboam thinks about this, and then Rehoboam's buddies, his entourage, shows up, and he tells them, well, here's what they say. This is what they're asking for. And Rehoboam foolishly listens to his friends. And his friend's advice was this: you tell them, if my dad whipped you with a whip, I'm going to whip you with scorpions. and you think it was bad with my dad, just wait till you see what a tough guy I am. Just wait till you see that I'm not going to put up with this kind of stuff, and I'm laying down the law right now. I'm the king. You're going to listen to me, and no more of these kind of rebellion stuff. So here he comes. 3 days later, he goes before Jeroboam and the delegation, and he has his answer, and he tells them, I'm not going to listen to what you're saying. You think my dad was bad? Just wait to see how much taxes I'm going to take. You think my dad was bad with requiring you to work? Just wait till you see the amount of labor that I'm going to make you do. What my dad did was nothing compared to this, and this rebellion against me ends now. Well, he talked tough, and it sounded good to him and his buddies, but he should have listened to the older guys, because what he discovers is the people weren't just saying this. They were serious. They weren't going to live under that level of oppression and demand any longer. And so at that point, Jeroboam and 10 of the tribes of Israel split from the nation of Israel. And so what we have is just a literal division that happens of the nation. We see that Judah, one of the tribes, or kind of like a state in Israel, splits off. It's at the kind of a very southern part of Israel, and it forms its own nation. And then the other tribes, they become a separate nation. And they're going to be led by Jeroboam. There's going to be 1/6 of the population that will become part of what we refer to as the southern kingdom, or it will often be in the Bible, it will be referred to as Judah. So this is the one nation. It's Judah, the southern part. And then the other part is going to be called Israel then. And so sometimes if you hear that Judah's fighting with Israel, and you go, what are they, Jewish? What are they doing? Well, it's because this great split ends up taking place, and they end up at war with one another. Judah is trying to take back those northern 10 tribes and force them to come back in line, which is going to be difficult with 5/6 of the population being in Israel. And so you're going to see that northern part referred to as Israel, and sometimes it will be called Ephraim, which is just one of the tribes there. But Ephraim's kind of like California is a massive part of our United States population. Ephraim's going to be the largest tribe that exists in the northern. So it'll be called Ephraim. Sometimes it'll be called Israel. And then the other nation is going to be called Judah. And the capital of Judah is going to be Jerusalem. The capital of Israel, or Ephraim, is going to be the city of Samaria eventually. And so this is the split that's going to take place. And so Jeroboam is here, and he is a king now. He's gone from being this guy hiding for fear of his life in Egypt to suddenly he's king of the best part of Israel. He's got all the kind of the farms, all the flat land. He's got all the places that would be easy, that had the wealth and the produce would come from. And so he's sitting in a pretty nice place, but he's got one problem that he's got to figure out how he is going to be able to solve this and exactly what he's going to do. And the problem that he runs into is this. He knows that in Jerusalem, Solomon had built an incredible temple to worship God in. He knows that the people in his new nation that he's got are Jews who want to worship God according to what the law says. And so he knows that his people are always going to be coming down and going to Jerusalem. And he thinks in his head, well, if they're doing that, there always is going to be this opportunity that they're going to have, that they're going to say, we're part of Judah, we're part of Jerusalem, and we want to reunite with them, and then they're going to kill me, and they're going to just push me aside, and the nation will be reunited, and I'm done for. And so Jeroboam comes up with this idea that's going to end up haunting the nation. He decides that he's going to make 2 golden calves, and if you remember from our talk in the Torah or the Pentateuch, this has happened before. They had a golden calf that they were worshiping when Moses was on the mountain getting the law. But Jeroboam makes these 2 golden calves, and he takes one of them and he puts in Dan, and the other one he puts in a place called Bethel. And he tells them, these are your gods, and you're to worship them. And so the people at this point, there comes this idolatry that's introduced immediately to the nation of Israel. And they're told that they're supposed to worship these calf gods that are supposed to be the real gods for them. And he does something else. He takes the priesthood, which is supposed to be only God had made clear in the law, was to only be people from the tribe of Levi, and he opens it up and he says, anybody now can be a priest, because he figures the tribe of Levi is going to be loyal to the Jerusalem and to the temple, and so he makes it where anybody, so he corrupts the priesthood at this point. And so this is Jeroboam and what he's doing with his nation. And then we come to Rehoboam, who decides, I got to get them back. And so these series of wars and battles erupts between the two nations. And they're fighting. And Rehoboam ultimately is never going to be able to recapture. The nations are going to stay split. At this point, they're going to end up going two separate ways. And these battles that Rehoboam and Jeroboam fight during this time is going to have some serious consequences, because David had added these kind of buffer cities that were on the edge of Israel, and they were meant to be kind of a safety zone to protect them from invaders. There was a lot of invaders that Israel would be fighting over the years, and so these would be kind of cities that they weren't exactly Jewish, and they were, they were expendable. But before Israel would be invaded, these cities would be invaded, and so they could do their fighting there. They could meet the people before the Jewish cities would suffer. So this buffer zone cities, well, they see the weakness of this battle going on between Judah and Israel, and they start to break away. And so Israel ends up losing its buffer zone, which is going to be a terrible thing, because there is this major trade route that goes through Israel. And it is something that is, there are nations around, such as Assyria especially, they want to control this route. They want to make sure that they can dominate this. There's a lot of money, a lot of wealth. And so they want to conquer the nations along this trade route. And here sits Israel. They're lush land. There's a lot of wealth that's there. And they've been fighting with each other. And so they've lost a lot of their military. They lose their buffer zone, and suddenly they're very vulnerable. And so we see this is going to kind of be the beginning of the end. It's going to last for several hundred years, but it's slowly going to go down, whereas Judah is going to be able to survive a little longer. And a lot of it's going to have to do with the fact that there's some better kings that's going to be in Judah, but also the fact that Judah is not as highly coveted as Israel's going to be. Judah's kind of a mountainous area. It's going to be more impoverished. It's not going to have the wealth. It's not going to be as attractive a place to conquer. And so it's going to be relatively safe for a longer period of time. But things are going to look pretty rough for Israel very quick, especially in light of the religious mistakes they make and some of the military mistakes they make. And we'll look more at that here in the coming weeks. Hope that you enjoyed this. I'd like to just close out with just a quick thought of something that Jeroboam had been told back when Solomon was still king. And what we see is God had sent a prophet to Jeroboam in 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 38. And he tells Jeroboam that he's going to make him a king. And this prophet says to Jeroboam in 1 Kings 11:38, if you'll listen to all that I command you, and will walk in my ways and do what is right in my eyes by keeping my statutes and my commandments, as David my servant did, I will be with you and will build you a sure house as I have built for David, and I will give Israel to you. And so God says, I want to bless you if you will follow and you will hold me and do the things that I tell you to do. But when Jeroboam becomes king in 1 Kings 12, a chapter later, verses 26 through 30, it says, and Jeroboam said in his heart, now the kingdom will turn back to the house of David. If this people go up to offer sacrifices in the temple of the Lord at Jerusalem, then the heart of this people will turn again to their Lord, to Rehoboam, king of Judah, and they will kill me and return to Rehoboam, king of Judah. So the king took counsel and made 2 calves of gold. And he said to the people, you have gone up to Jerusalem long enough. Behold your gods, O Israel, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. And he set one up in Bethel, and the other he put in Dan. I share that because I want you to hear what God could have done through Jeroboam and what Jeroboam ultimately caused to happen by his disobedience. Why was Jeroboam disobedient to what God told him to do? He was afraid. And I just want to present to you that many times in our fear, we open ourselves up to be vulnerable to make choices that are not good choices, that are going to harm us and harm others who are around us, because we're not being obedient to what God says, but we're trying to do something that we think is necessary, even though God says it's not what He wants. And so I just want to encourage you, if you're at a place right now, maybe you're afraid of something going on in your life, don't be a Jeroboam. Instead, trust the Lord to take care of you. Walk in His path, follow His commands, and you're going to find that God will honor you. I'm going to close in prayer. And as I close in prayer, if you are listening to me right now and you're not a Christian, you can ask God to forgive you of your sins and you can become a follower of Jesus Christ. If you are, I'm just going to believe for God's blessing in your life. Heavenly Father, I thank you for everyone that has been with me today. I thank you for all of your blessings, all the good things you're doing. I ask for anybody that doesn't know you, that's not following you, it's not part of their family, may this be the day of their salvation. Help them make a choice to become a follower of you and ask for the forgiveness of their sins. For all the rest of us, Lord, help us walk in wisdom. Help us live according to your commands. May we not be like Solomon, Rehoboam, or Jeroboam that ends up doing things that's going to end up causing us to split away from your blessing, but may we always be faithful to you. Well, thank you for that in your name, Jesus. Amen. If you have any prayer requests or you've decided to become a follower of Jesus Christ, I want to encourage you to send me an email to Pastor Wade at ocalafirst.org. And if you send me that, I'd like to get you some information if you've decided to become a Christian on how you can live and follow Christ in victory. If you've got a prayer request and you'll send me that prayer request, I will make sure that our prayer teams here at the church will be praying for you. May God bless you today, and I hope that you have a good rest of your week.